Well, hello everybody. Good morning to you all from New York, almost afternoon. Good morning in Latin America. Good morning in most of the United States. Good evening across the Atlantic in Europe. Welcome to another session put together by Fundación Internacional para la Libertad, jointly with Fundación Libertad. We have a wonderful program today. I'm sure we will learn very much from our most distinguished guest today. As you all know, the topic today will revolve around the cancel culture, and we have titled it rather cheekily, let us cancel the cancel culture before it cancels us. We could not have a more appropriate guest today to address this issue and many more that I'm sure will come up. Let me say we have a very international audience as usual. We have people in the United States, in Europe, in Latin America. So this has, of course, stirred up a lot of interest, and we're very happy to welcome you all. Let me say a few words about Ayaan, and then the format, most of you are familiar with it, will be exactly the same as on other occasions. I will after introducing her, I will hand it over to her. She will speak for about 10 minutes, and then I will engage in a conversation with her. I will put several questions to her. I will also pick up as many questions as I can from the audience. Unfortunately, as you know, I will not be able to pick up all of them, but I will try and be as fair and as fair as possible. I will pick them up through the chat window, of course. So let me say that Ayaan Hirsi Ali is truly one of the most admirable and courageous public persons alive. Of all the things one can say about her, that she survived and denounced the oppression of fundamentalist Islam in Africa as a Somali born who migrated to several countries, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, finally Kenya. That as an activist and a member of parliament in her then adopted country, the Netherlands, from 2003 to 2006, she faced the real danger of assassination for her views and had to finally settle in the United States, where she now lives. Perhaps none is more important than this. She is a constant reminder of what Western liberal democracies once proudly stood for, but seemed increasingly to have forgotten. She's a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. She's a founder of the AHA Foundation that bears, of course, her initials, an institution that fights for women's rights, particularly Muslim women, but not just Muslim women, and has fought against female genital mutilation, arranged marriages, and honor killings, horrific practices that she has faced directly or indirectly in her own life. She has written several books. I have had the pleasure of reading most of them, including Infidel in 2007, Nomad from Islam to America, a personal journey through the clash of civilizations in 2010, Heretic, Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now, 2015, and The Challenge of Dawah, 2017. And I believe there's a new book coming up next year called Pray, that will be published by HarperCollins. So Ayaan, it is truly an honor and a pleasure to have you with us. And let me now hand it over to you. And it's lights, camera, and action.
Thank you, Alvaro. Thank you so very much for having me. Thank you for those kind words. I can only see the three of you, but I'm sure that there are a larger number of people that can see us and hear us. And I want to say, in this crazy age of COVID-19, I hope that you're all healthy and you're in a safe place and that your loved ones are healthy and safe. I want to start by, and use these 10 minutes to provoke those, my audience. I'd like to provoke them into thinking, just using these 10 minutes as a way for them to think very quickly about what do they have. When we say liberal and liberalism, we talk about a number of things. We talk about freedom. we talk about equality, we talk about the rule of law, we talk about the assumption of innocence, we talk about the rights and freedoms of the individual and protecting the rights and the freedoms of the individual. And when we talk about human rights, the most basic human rights, we also assume that those human rights are universal. We attach a lot of importance to science and to the truth. Of course, there is no absolute truth, but we believe that there are facts, and through observation, through exploration and experimentation, we can at least establish what can be an objective truth, such as 2 + 2 is 4. There is universal agreement, regardless of where you are in the world. 2 + 2 is 4. 1 + 1 is 2. Now, when you think about cancel culture and when you really dive into it, you're going to find that it is an ideology that challenges all of that. That is the first step. This ideology that we call cancel culture, it comes in many different names. Sometimes it's called identity politics. Sometimes it's called woke. Sometimes it's called a critical justice theory or critical race theory. There are 3 people I have found, and I think the whole world must be grateful to them. They have really dived deep into its origins. What is cancel culture? Where does it originate from? Who are the people pushing it? What are their goals? They've answered all of those questions for us. And I've been reading their work along with the work of others. But I really would like to recommend these 3 people. One of them is Dr. Peter Barbosian. At this moment, he's a full-time member in the Department of Philosophy at Portland State University. And the second person is a woman called Helen Pluckrose. She's editor-in-chief of a magazine called Ario, I think I'm completely mispronouncing it. And the third person is a mathematician, James Lindsay. Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay have written a book together called Cynical Theories. And it will explain to you the ins and outs, the history, everything you need to know about cancel culture. So I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert. But what I'm saying to you is, like you, like ordinary citizens who care about liberalism, who care about freedom, who care about our societies, and our societies are not perfect societies, but we do care about them. I'm going to tell you what I have learned about cancel culture I find so alarming. So alarming as to say it is something that we all need to awaken to and stand up to. What have I found out? Now, when it comes to freedom, to equality, to the rule of law, to the assumption of innocence, all of these things are rejected by the people who are pushing cancel culture. They are saying to us that the only way human beings can have a relationship with one another is through the prism of power. And in that, you only have oppressors and the oppressed. The white man is the oppressor. The white man is the racist. The white man is the misogynist. The white man is irredeemable. He just is racist. Everyone else is oppressed. And then among the oppressors, they have what they call their language is so horrible, but I will try and speak it. They have something called positionality. They then segment everyone else in society along these collective lines. So there are white women, black women, other women of color, and then there are homosexuals, the LGBT, and this LGBT behind it is ... because I think they're still active in trying to segment more and more collective people. And these collectivities, for these collectivities, they've created a matrix, and that matrix is called intersectionality. In other words, we're all victims of the white man, but we're not equal victims. Some victims are more on the ladder or in that power matrix than others. It couldn't be more Orwellian. And when they talk of power, power is zero sum. You either have it or you don't have it. And if you want to be empowered, then it has to be taken from someone else. They reject science and say there's no such a thing as objective truth to seek. There are only narratives, only stories, and it's all very subjective. The white man is racist. The white woman is racist. Now, some of them in the, I would say, classical sense of defining the white racist, people who openly say that one race is superior to another and that inferior races must be excluded from jobs, they must be excluded from the country, they must be treated in a certain way. That's how we used to define racism. That's not how the cancel culture defines racism. They just say racism is within the national institutions and structures, and it is the white male oppressor that has created these structures, and these structures are inherently racist. And the only way to get justice, racial justice, or any other kind of justice, is to dismantle the whole thing. Because truth is not objective. Alvaro, I'm a Black woman. If I accuse you of racism, then you, the accused, you have to prove that you are not racist. There is a woman now whose book is a bestseller and who's getting people in the United States of America to take classes in universities, human resources departments, in corporations, political parties, and she has identified, she has diagnosed every single white person with racism. And the logic used is this. She says, you are racist. The name of her book is White Fragility. So she says, you are racist. If you say, I am not, where is the evidence? She says, well, the fact that you're asking for evidence, the fact that you're resisting being labeled a racist is proof of the fact. And you are displaying a sense of white fragility. And this goes on and on and on. Again, I'm not an expert on the theories underpinning cancel culture or identity politics. I've given you the names of the 3 people who actually are and who have dived into it. But my conclusion, my walk away after I've studied all of that is these people who are pushing cancel culture are against freedom. They're against critical thinking, even though they use the word critical. They don't mean critical thinking the way you and I understand it. Because you and I think by asking questions, we gain more information. By exchanging ideas, I see things from your perspective. So that way we can improve. You and I think about universalism. We have a common humanity. I don't look at myself in the mirror and the first thing that I see is my skin color. I hope neither do you do that. I think there is that common humanity that we can get to a place where we don't have to see each other as races or tribes or collectives that are hostile to one another, but as individuals and within a liberal framework, who can get along, who can coexist, who can discuss our problems and resolve them. I assume that you're innocent until proven guilty, that everyone is innocent until proven guilty, and we've established institutions and systems that aspire to realize that. And when we talk about science, I don't think of it as a trait of structural racism or whiteness, as the cancel culture is trying to convince us. Now, how can we achieve what we think is, in a liberal society, a constant improvement on what we have? How can we get to that dynamism? We can do that because we have free speech. We have freedom of conscience. If you cook up a theory right now, I think it would be wonderful for the rest of us to think of that theory. We call it a hypothesis. We test it out. If it's true, it's wonderful. Think about the people who are working right now on vaccines for COVID-19, right? If it doesn't work, we don't punish you. We don't ostracize you. We don't do any of that. The theory, it's okay. The fact that you failed has done human beings a favor, because then we can go and try something else. But that's not what cancel culture does. Cancel culture is punitive. They want you to conform. And if you don't conform, you are deplatformed, an ugly term that they use, meaning you are no longer welcome to your job, to your social circles. Your career is ended. It is about power. Cancel culture is about power. Cancel culture is about the corruption of language. Cancel culture is about the pollution of the minds of young, impressionable people, especially the millennials. It's in our universities. That's where it started, but it started to spread towards other places now in our corporations, political parties, and other political institutions. It's everywhere. If you asked me 5 years ago about cancel culture, I would have told you it's just the sort of silly stuff that university students do. Today, it's something completely different. It makes us vulnerable. It's a homegrown problem, and it makes us vulnerable to adversaries who are and have always been hostile to liberal societies. For instance, the Chinese government can take full advantage and exploit the fact that we have cancel culture. The radical Islamists are already exploiting it. So it is a phenomenon that may seem to many people to be just a passing foolishness of student groups, but it's not. I think this is now the next ideology that we have to pay attention to and push back against. We have to develop a counter narrative that defends freedom and the institutions that freedoms were founded on, the institutions of truth. The cancel culture people will have us in segments of collectives. That will be our society. If we go down their path, we will be segregated. And this segregation will not be forced by the state, but it is top down. I will then have to only associate with Blacks, and not only Blacks, but also just Black women. And if you're a member of the LGBTQ, you only do that. And if you're a member of the white, you know, you can see once it's what they're saying is implemented, how that will segregate our society into little islands of people who are supposed to associate with one another because of their immutable traits, not because of their ideas, not because of all of these complex, wonderful ways that human beings associate with one another is canceled. It's only through your race, your gender, and whatever it is that stupid intersectionality matrix that they have developed. Only that way can you do it, and no other way. I think I've run through my 10 minutes, and I welcome now your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ayaan. A very, very powerful statement, a lot of food for thought there. Let me quote to you a poll, a recent poll that you may be aware of by the, I believe by the Cato Institute, that found out about 1/3 of Americans say they are afraid of losing their jobs or simply missing out on a career opportunity because of the views they express. Not because of the global economic context, not because of COVID, not because of these kinds of factors that usually one associates with the fear of losing a job or not finding an opportunity in life, but very specifically a fear related to the consequences of expressing their views. And this is in the United States of America. I mean, I found this profoundly, profoundly disturbing. What would you respond? What would you say to somebody who said, well, critical debate, even fierce, open debate is very much part and parcel of liberal democracy. And what people like you are doing is trying to stifle debate. You don't like to be criticized. You don't want the other side to criticize you. And then you call them the cancel culture because it's a way of trying to censor their criticism of you. In other words, what's the red line that separates legitimate public discussion and debate in a liberal democracy from what you call the cancel culture?
See, the interesting thing is that this cancel culture with all its theories and ideologies was born here in America at Harvard University, for heaven's sake, right? And so this is what I've been doing in the last 15 to 20 years. My fight for free speech was against the radical Islamists. And the radical Islamists were people who are coming from other countries and other continents and coming into liberal societies. And inside liberal societies, they would say we need special treatment. In America, we have the First Amendment. Speech is protected. And so my job would be to explain to the Muslims that freedom of speech is actually really one of the greatest values that human beings have come up with. Now, with the cancel culture, these professors and students are all American. It's all homegrown. They have latched onto some of these ideas that flow from postmodernism, from the disappointed Marxists because Marxism failed. They no longer talk about materialism, but they talk about culture. And they have now come to the conclusion that these foundational principles of liberty, such as freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion, they've come to hate this stuff. And unfortunately, because everyone was looking the other way, they've had a large enough number of students whom they have brainwashed into. Do you remember the days when people would talk about microaggressions and trigger warnings? And so I was at Harvard back then, and I just used to think this is worth a giggle. It's the kind of thing you laugh at, microaggressions. What the hell is that? And so we all looked away. We just thought it was something silly because these kids would one day graduate. They'd go try and find an employer, and hopefully those employers are not going to stand up, they're not going to tolerate this nonsense. Unfortunately, the exact opposite happened. So this is what we're seeing. We're seeing not just in the academic sphere now, but in the work sphere, that people are scared, they're terrified of saying what they think of doing their job. Even CEOs are scared. And what you get is this, and online, the internet, I think, has accelerated this phenomenon in a way it wouldn't have happened in the 60s or 70s, but it has. And if your question is how do we push back, then I think the way to do it is, number one, to become aware of it, because there are still people, and I think most people are still thinking, it's still a silly thing. It's something you can dismiss. You know, if you are canceled, maybe people just didn't like your work, go find another job. So people are still trivializing it. We're still complacent. And I think we need to get rid of that complacency and see where this is going. If you look at someone like J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, and she's struggling to draw attention to some of the unintended consequences of the transgender movement. And what is on full display in front of us is that J.K. Rowling is not being confronted by them using arguments, using evidence, using reason and science. All they're doing is just ad hominem, just try and destroy her as an individual, try and get her shut out. I welcome her fight and her resilience because it gives us an example. It shows us how we all must do it. And I know we're not all billionaires, we're not all celebrities, but I think every single time you're confronted with it, if you know what it is and what their goals are, you'll stand up to them.
What's very fascinating and disturbing as well, Ayaan, about this is that it's always very difficult to draw the line on radicalism. There's always
Yes.
being even more radical than the radicals. And we have seen, you mentioned J.K. Rowling. She's somebody, I wouldn't call her a radical, but she's somebody who has stood up for feminism. She was a symbol of feminism for many years. And she's now being attacked, not from the opposite side, but I guess to the left of her, there's a movement that now considers her something like a traitor for the reasons that you just mentioned. We've had recently in the United States the case, you mentioned CEOs. We've had the case of the owner of Goya Foods, a very, very important enterprise, very well known across America, that was founded by a Latino, that's owned by a Latino, and that's been very much part of the Latino pride in the United States, a symbol of Latino achievement in the United States, and simply for expressing a positive view about the current president, with which one may or may not agree. It's entirely, of course, beside the point. He has been subjected to unbelievable amounts of abuse, and his products have been subjected to a boycott that's really beginning to hurt. So this is really incredible. It's always possible to be even more radical. Harper's Magazine published a few weeks ago an open letter by a number of intellectuals, many of whom are on the left and have been very sympathetic to many of the people who are part of the cancel culture. And yet they have been subjected to incredible abuse simply for asking for more tolerance in American society. I mean, does this strike you as particularly disturbing?
Of course, absolutely. I mean, more than disturbing, it's alarming. I think this could lead to if we go down that path, it could lead to a closing of the minds of people, not just in America, but in liberal societies. And again, this is why we draw back attention to the core of liberalism, right? Liberalism is about the individual freedoms, individual rights, and those are universal. Now, if you disagree with someone, you just say you disagree, you put your evidence on the table, and you expect your audience to listen to you and to listen to your opponent and to look at things from all these different perspectives. And the individual audience member walks away with what he or she thinks is right or suits them. That's liberalism. You live and you let live. The cancel culture ideology, again, it goes by many different names: identity politics, critical race theory, critical justice, social justice. They've got so many different names. They've literally corrupted our language so that a lot of us don't even know what we're talking about. But what they look at the CEO of Goya. What does any CEO do at any given administration? They try to get to those in political power to advance the interests of their company, which is either their employers, stakeholders, and all the above. Why would he have gone to see President Obama and President Bush? And why would he not see President Trump? Well, other CEOs are doing that. But if you apply their logic, which is, it's not just that, it's not what you think, it's also who you associate with. That could get you canceled. And so that's why they are canceling or boycotting his products. And I think that's the sort of thing you push back. Look, if you don't like President Trump, go and vote. And even in a scenario where he wins the next election, it's just another 4 years before election after that. That's how democracy works. It's not heaping abuse on the people that you think are of the wrong politics. But that is, I think, where a lot of people misunderstand the cancel culture and those who are pushing for cancel culture. It's not just Trump. It's going to be, it was there before Trump. It's going to be with us after Trump. Because what they're seeking, when you really pay attention, they read their works, read Abram Kendi, read D'Angelo, read Black Lives Matter, go to the Black Lives Matter website, listen very carefully to what they're saying and absorb it. These people are not about achieving justice. They're about dismantling and destroying the entire system. If you understand that, they're accusing, they think liberalism is a power structure that has been designed by the white man to subjugate Black people, women, and the LGBT communities, and the other segmentations of society that they put out there. That's what they think.
We have an interesting discussion going on in our chat between several people. Let me mention them very quickly. Henry, Emir, Esteban, and Ficheto, about the United States. The image of the United States across the world, across much of the world today, in part preconceived and in part because of what's coming out of the United States itself, is that of a country that is systemically unfair, systemically discriminatory against Blacks, against Latinos. In other words, not that that's a society within which you have these flaws, but that the entire system, the entire institutional framework is based on that. What would you say? You're an immigrant in the United States. You were born and raised in countries where liberal democracy was not part of the deal. You went through the experience of liberal democracy in the Netherlands, then you migrated finally to the United States where you were based. So you have this unique perspective, which is both that of an insider and an outsider. What would you answer? What would you respond to those outside of the United States who see a systemic issue about racism, about discrimination in the United States?
I think the United States of America is the best place on planet Earth to be Black. It's the best place to be female. It's the best place to be homosexual, the best place to be transgender. It's the best place to be anything you want to be. Now, having said that, I also want to say it's a nation of 350 million people plus. I want to challenge your audience by saying, why is it that so many people from Africa, therefore Black, from Asia, brown, and even from other parts of, say, Europe or Latin America, why is it that so many people want to come, abandon their homes, and emigrate Why do they want to come and live in the United States? Because I think even in the year 2020, with all our complex problems, still it is the best place on planet Earth to be whoever you want to be. I have a Jamaican friend who says when he was in Jamaica, he felt he had no freedoms. When he came to America, all he wanted was, please leave me alone. And so America is the place where if you want to be left alone, we leave you alone. Now, having said that, we do have huge problems. I have been on Zoom calls, conferences, where I listened to a number of Black people, not Black like me who emigrated, but Black, the descendants of slaves, who says they're simply tired of being stopped by the police all the time. They apply for jobs, they don't get it. They apply for loans, they don't get it. They say there is something about being a Black American in America right now that's infuriating. And if you hear it, it's absolutely infuriating. But everyone in the room who listened to that, white Americans, Black Americans, brown Americans, were saying, we need to stop that. Yes, the George Floyd, the heinous killing of George Floyd, hideous, absolutely disgusting. That, you know, it got everyone to a place where we can't ignore this anymore. Let's do something about it. But let's do something about it within the framework of the founding principles that insisted on freedom, insisted on equality, and not as Black Lives Matter and all these other radical organizations who are saying, first let's dismantle the system and then start from scratch, or let's have reparations, or the only way that equality can be achieved is by taking away from those who have and giving it to those who don't have. We know that things like that have been tried in history in several places, and it never worked.
And in that sense, is Black Lives Matter part of the solution, or is it part of the problem, particularly in the way we have seen it react to that crime and other crimes in recent years?
Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. But there is an organization called Black Lives Matter that their agenda, they have an agenda, and I have read and gone through what their demands are, and I find that they have very little interest in Blacks and Black people. They do not talk about Black on Black crime. You know, the largest number of Black people who are killed in America are killed by other Black people. They don't address that. They say they want to abolish the nuclear family. The nuclear family. We know that if you want to lift Blacks up or any other impoverished group, that you would be advocating for marriage or, in any case, fatherhood, where you would urge fathers to look after their children. That's not what they're after. They're not looking to see if what we can do within the framework that we have to improve the education of Black children, to improve employment numbers. That's not what they're after. Their agenda is hardcore Marxist, neo-Marxist. They want to topple statues. They want to bring the country down. In fact, in some of the things that in Seattle, Portland, Minneapolis, Chicago, it's Black people who are being affected negatively by some of the activism of Black Lives Matter. And so I'm very, very critical of Black Lives Matter. They're pretending, they're using racial injustice to push an agenda that is anti-liberalism, and it's anti-American.
Ayaan, what is very disturbing, among other things, about some of these groups is that they're trying to obtain what one might call the monopoly of morality in the United States and in liberal democracies. And there's something almost religious about this. And I put this to you. You have fought against religious fundamentalism. You have risked your life in the fight against religious fundamentalism. you must be amazed, having migrated to a liberal democracy, to find out that religious fundamentalism is also part and parcel of liberal democracy nowadays, and that in many cases, liberal democracy is being eroded from within by groups that want, in many ways, under the cloak of something that sounds very much like religion, to go against the values that made these societies possible. I mean, this must be very striking to you.
It's absolutely, it's very striking, of course. And when I studied Western history and Western politics, of course, I became familiar with the stories of the Inquisition and the bloody massacres between the Catholics and the Protestants. And up until the end of the Second World War, where people had in Germany, but it spread to the rest of Europe, where this idea of white supremacy cost millions and millions and millions of lives. I'm familiar with the Holocaust. I'm familiar with attempts to annihilate those that this is a European history. I'm also familiar with the story and history of America and slavery in America, but also segregation, the era of Jim Crow. I'm familiar with all of that. And all of this stuff, we were told, came from the right, and it did. And so I think in the West, because all of those horrors, or most of those horrors, I mean, if I bring in the Soviet Union, then it's also on the left, but we thought we were familiar with them. And so when people started to push these ideas forth, we would immediately push them back. I didn't think it was my fight. I remember thinking, I need to explain to Europeans and Americans the thought process and the dogmas and the rigidities of the jihadis. That was what I did for the last 15 or 20 years. And now we're being struck by this new phenomenon. It's coming from the left. It's born in the universities. It has, to me, almost the same mindset as the jihadis, because they say it's only their truth that matters. And it's pure. It's pure, and you cannot disagree with it. And they use the language of justice, the language of equality, and so what they do is they tap on your sense of compassion, and then they corrupt it and manipulate it. And I find that just amazing, that people whom I thought were well educated and well off, as in affluent, are actually falling for this stuff. You know, jihadism, whatever you may say about it, it's been around for 1400 years. But this critical race theory stuff, you know, Robin DiAngelo, that's just so plainly stupid. You are a racist. I'm not a racist. The fact that you refuse to say that makes you one. I would think people who had actually been to university would tell her to go buzz off, but they wouldn't. This is what's amazing to me about how gullible people are.
Ayaan, I would love to hear from you how you define your own identity, because we're talking about identity politics. We're talking about how identity politics has become this very powerful collectivist tool that people are using to erode the values of liberal democracy. I tend to think of identity as something incredibly rich and diverse and even changing, mutable. And yet we talk about identity politics or the issues involved in identity politics in ways that are almost immutable, that never change, and that you really have to find your place in one of them and stay there forever. How do you think about your own identity in this context?
Well, I think of my identity, and I hope you do the same, as being richer and more profound than just my skin color or my gender. I associate with whoever I would like to associate with. I try to read as much as I can. I try to travel and see as many people as I can. I've been to Asia, I've been to Africa, I've been to Australia. I've been all over Europe. I've traveled all over America. And this is all ways of enriching my mind and my identity, my associations, enjoying the life that I have. I think of myself first and foremost as a human being. And the first impulse I have is how can I, when it comes to other human beings, it's how can we celebrate and enrich our common humanity? How can we emphasize our common humanity? And this is what enrages me about these identity politics people. They want to separate us. They want to segregate. They want to reduce me to my skin color. They want to reduce me to my gender. And I'm not having it. And I urge everyone else to say, we're not having it. When I see you, I don't see you as white. I want to know, what have you been reading? What have you been up to? How can we engage? What do we agree on? What do we do? You have all these conversations, and it's enriching. And I have children, and I don't want to raise them in an environment where my boys only think of themselves as black. Can you imagine how narrow that is? And unscientific. And the more you look at this cancel culture people and their ideology and where they come from and where they're headed, it's nihilistic. They want to break things down, but they're not building anything. I have to ask, as I read this stuff, I think, but what do they want? The jihadis want to go to heaven and have their 72 virgins. What are the 72 virgins for the cancel culture people? What do they want?
Leila has an interesting question for you. She raises an interesting issue, the issue of feminism. She says, as a woman who fights for individual freedoms, what's your opinion of the emergence of radical feminism? And is there room for a different type of feminism, for, let's say, a liberal kind of feminism? And what can that kind of feminism do to advance the causes that you are trying to advance?
Well, we've always had liberal feminism, where as women, not me, but, all the way to Wollstonecraft, we've had liberal feminists who were saying, please, as women, we just want equal rights. We want to be seen as equal human beings before the law. We didn't want to be men. We don't want to abolish men. We want to have equal rights and equal opportunities with men. That's, as far as I'm concerned, liberal feminism. Now, I look at places. My next book is called Pray, and I'm looking at what is happening in Europe, where even though we have the laws, we are, as women, to a certain degree, we have been given access to higher education, employment, all of these things. But now our very safety is at question, because a lot of people are coming, a lot of men especially are coming from societies where they're not used to respecting women, and women out on the streets in public transport, and they're not feeling safe, and society is doing nothing about it. So as a feminist, that's the kind of thing I will point out to. I'm married to a British man, and I'm seeing that some of the women's organizations in the United Kingdom are saying there's all this spike in rapes, but prosecutors are doing nothing about it. The police is doing nothing about it. That's the kind of attention I would like to draw. Like you say, we are safe and equal before the law, but we are not. But, and I have to go back again to the issue that J.K. Rowling is talking about. If these postmodernists, these cancel culture people, identity politics are saying they want to further the rights of transgender, and I'm with that, but in doing so, we're going to erase what it is to be a woman. I'm not going to have that, and I think you shouldn't. And that's the difference between radical feminism versus liberal feminism. If women as a category are going to be described as people who menstruate, then I think all women should say, wait a second. We've been fighting for these rights for as long as we know. We're not people who menstruate, we are women. And not any man can just pretend to be a woman. And there are issues with these transitioning. We're seeing young girls who are being bullied into and being abused into transitioning from being girls to being boys. They're having hormone treatments. And this is part of it's peer pressure. Part of it is probably psychological, but it's something. These are issues that we really do have to debate. You don't have to be a radical feminist to do it. You can be just a normal liberal feminist. Use reason, use evidence, I'm a woman. I was wonderfully happy with what happened at the start of the Me Too movement, but then it started to morph into something else and become a political tool. And as a woman and as a feminist, I'm going to say, wait a second, that's not what we wanted.
You talked about the segmentation and fragmentation of society. It reminded me of de Tocqueville, who in the 19th century, of course, in his famous book on democracy in America, very much highlighted this trait, this characteristic of American democracy, which was its associative nature. All over the place, he saw associations, people getting together, associating together, and organizing themselves from the bottom up. It was very much a civil society thing, not a top-down government thing. And of course, he praised this, and he said, this is what makes America very strong. And he contrasted this with what was happening in France, his own country, and in the rest of Europe. And yet, what's fascinating, and I mean, I totally agree, who could not agree with this? Obviously, that's been a huge part of America's success and America's dynamism. And at the same time, when I hear you talk about the fragmentation of American society and almost the tribalism that's coming up in American society, it's as if those very positive traits and characteristics had kind of transformed and metamorphosized into something that's becoming exactly the negation of what someone like Tocqueville so much liked and appreciated in American society.
I think what Tocqueville observed was indeed very healthy in my view. And it's the opposite of tribal, because the people who came together and associated with one another and tried to make things work were not of the same skin color. Probably they were of the same skin color, but what I mean was it wasn't so much about the same ethnicity, the same biological immutable traits. It was they were trying to develop a common interest, and in that common interest, they pushed for that. I think that's healthy, and I think in the time of Tocqueville, what he was observing was in France and in other parts of Europe, you had these rigid, issues of class. You had the aristocracy, and then you had the papacy, and you had this and that and the other group, and these people couldn't talk to one another, and that there were all these walls between them. So in these early days of America, when they were having these associations and it was bottom up, it was absolutely healthy. But please do not confuse that with the ideologues of the cancel culture. Again, I have to remind you all, the identity politics of the 20th and 21st century is founded in universities, almost Ivy League universities, almost all of them Ivy League universities. That's where it's developed, that's where it's cultivated, that's where they find the impressionable young students in whose minds they inculcate these ideas, and then they send them out into the world. So it's not your town hall or your church association or people finding themselves around sports and other common ideas. This is something very different. This is the identity politics philosophy. What it boils down to, and I think you've seen this in Europe, it's a hostility to modernity. They call themselves, and it's come out of the postmodern, part of it has come out of the postmodern philosophies. You go back as far as Rousseau, it's romanticism. It's the noble savage idea. It is if we just bring down modernity, things will be different. And they don't know how things are going to be different. In fact, instead of sending young people to Harvard for the, at the age of 18 or 19, I would really want to send them to various places in Africa, various places in South Asia, so that they can actually live without water, without electricity. They can lead a tribal life. They can be exposed to how these tribes associate with one another. And if we had done that with the young, it's the best school in the world, if they had come back from such trips, I don't think they would be listening to cancel culture and critical race theory and all this rubbish. They would really appreciate the societies that they live in and the legacy of the freedoms and institutions that they've inherited.
Thank you. I really appreciate the distinction you made, because I think a lot of people are confused about this, and it's extremely, extremely important to make this distinction between this wonderful characteristic of American society, this very much bottom-up dynamism in American society that has held up through, well, centuries really, and continues today, and something very different, which is this tribalism and segmentation of society that the cancel culture is trying to impose. Talking about tribalism, we only have a few minutes, but I do want to draw everybody's attention to this, because you yourself have lived in tribal societies. You know tribalism from within, and yet you come to liberal democracies, and you have to teach liberal democracies not to become tribal. I mean, this is a crazy paradox, Ayaan, isn't it?
It's a crazy paradox. I know we have a few minutes left, and so I really want to leave your audience with the idea. First of all, this is not just American. My son, who's 8 years old, he says there is COVID-19 and there is Wokid-19. And this pandemic called Wokid-19, it has spread across the Atlantic. It's now wreaking havoc in places like the United Kingdom. And it's only a matter of time before it comes to Spain, and other Spanish-speaking countries. So please don't think of it only as an American problem. Yes, it's born in America, but it's spreading everywhere else. And also, because we have just a few minutes left, I would like your audiences to pick up a book that I think is going to be released in August 25, and it's called Cynical Theories. Cynical Theories by Helen Pluckrose, P-L-U-C-K Rose, R-O-S-E, Pluckrose, and James Lindsay, L-I-N-D-S-A-Y. And they have, I've been calling it cancel culture throughout this event, and identity politics and so on, but they bring it together, they explain it, they take you through the lexicon, and once you understand it, you're going to see why all the problems that we've been talking about. Now, I want to answer your question about tribe and tribes and clans. So I come from Somalia, and actually ours is even more, so we're one tribe, but we're divided into clans. So if you live in a tribal society, you have, power is a zero-sum game. You either have it or you don't. There are those who are oppressed, and there are those who oppress. And those who oppress are very proud of it, and those who are oppressed are very resentful. And that's the only relationship you can imagine. And when the resentment builds and builds and builds, I don't know, I'm 50 years old, I don't know what the average age is of people who are watching this, but I would like you to look into what happened between the Tutsis and the Hutus in Rwanda. Because then it culminates in that incredibly dramatic explosion of rage where the Hutus go after the Tutsis and all they can do is massacre. So if you live in a tribal society, you are constantly terrified of the moment when things will explode. It's always conflict. There is always hunger for some. Even when you have plenty, you're afraid. There is no trust. There is no exchange of evidence. There is no truth. It's a very difficult and I would say a terrifying way of living, because the basic principle is fear, not freedom. And so, of course, when I came to a free society and I see now some of these tribal tendencies, I think you're playing with fire. You don't know what you're talking about. But if you want to experience it, you could always go to a tribal society, because there are so many of them out there. And maybe that will tame you. Maybe if you went and lived in any, I mean, I wouldn't send young people to places where it's unsafe, but they're relatively safe places where they could actually go and study and see for themselves and experience for themselves. And then when they come home, they'll say, oh dear, we have our problems, but we don't want to go back to tribal life. And that would be the end of intersectionality.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ayaan. I could listen to you for hours and hours on end, and I would be amazed to learn as many things as I have learned in this past hour, I am sure. Unfortunately, the time is up. I really hope we can have you again. I'm sure everybody has enjoyed it. And the good thing about this, Ayaan, is that as long as you are out there fighting the good fight, there is hope for liberal democracies. Thank you so much. You're a jewel. We love you, and keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you, Alvaro. Thank you so very much. And you keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.